Kicking off at number 5, the Caleuche. And for this first foray into these particular ghost ships that haunt the sea, we're going to be heading over to the mythologies of Chile and the many legends that have been built around its coastal landscape. One of those, according to Chilean legend, is that of the Caleuche, a large ghost ship that sails the seas of Chaleurs, a small island just off the coast, where it only ever appears at night. The ship itself is said to appear as beautiful, cast in a bright white light, an enormous vessel with 3 masts and 5 sails each. It is said that when the Caleuche appears, it is always at night and always full of lights, with the sounds of a great party and a feast on board. Quickly though, it disappears, plunging back beneath the murky depths. Interestingly enough though, although this vessel is said to be similar to the Flying Dutchman, there is a boatload of mythology relating to this particular legend. One of these versions claims that the vessel is crewed by the drowned, souls lost at sea, who are brought to the ship by 3 mythological figures in Chilean legend. 2 sisters, one of them the Sirena Charlotta, a type of mermaid, and the other the Pincoya, a type of water spirit said to protect the Chilean coast. And then their brother, the Pincoy, their male counterpart, who has the body of a sea lion. It's pretty cool. Once aboard, the perished souls can resume their existence in an eternal reverie of adventure on the high seas. However, there is a much more sinister version of this legend, which states that the crew of the Caleuche instead sailed the Chiloe archipelago, luring fishermen and sailors toward it with an enchanting music to enslave them as part of their crew for eternity, where they are twisted and then contorted and put to work in their afterlife. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I prefer the first one, actually. Swinging in at number 4, the Eliza Battle. And for this one, we're pinching the parameters of the 7 seas, and instead we're taking a look at one of the most notorious maritime disasters that, instead of on an ocean, occurred on a river. The Tombigbee River, to be precise, a stretch of water that runs between Columbus, Mississippi and Mobile, Alabama. And here we have the legend of the phantom steamboat of the Tombigbee. Back in 1852, one of the largest river steamboats constructed at the time, the Eliza Battle, was put into service between the 2 southern states. During one particularly cold February in the winter of 1858, after the Eliza Battle had departed the city of Columbus, the ship made its way downriver, stopping on the way at Pickensville, Gainesville, Demopolis and several other small river landings. By the time that the steamboat had left off at Demopolis though, it was filled to the rafters with passengers, and not only passengers but also over 1,200 bales of cotton to be ferried to the final stop. Now, although it roughly still remains a complete mystery, around 2 AM on March the 1st, 1858, about 30 miles downriver from Demopolis, the crew of the Eliza Battle awoke, startled to discover that the cotton bales on the main deck were on fire. Flames soared and quickly engulfed the ship's hull, soon spreading out of control despite the frigid temperatures attributed to the odd, gusty evening. The boat continued onward though, the entirety of its exterior completely engulfed in flames and cut off from their lifeboats. The passengers, many of them who had awoken dressed in their night clothes, were forced to plunge into the icy river below. Now, some of them survived, mainly by floating atop the remaining cotton bales, but all in all, over 33 people lost their lives, both crew and passengers included. The Eliza Battle quickly sank beneath the water, the wreckage of which still lingers at the bottom of the Tombigbee River. It's said that on a particularly cold and windy night, the Eliza Battle will emerge from the icy fog engulfed in flames, once again a warning sign of an oncoming ill omen.
Coming in at number 3, we've got the tale of the Jenny. Now, the tales I've told up until this point have been mysterious indeed. The fates of the folks on board are up in the air and may never be fully explained. The story of the Jenny is just as mysterious, especially because it's been contested by a few folks, but the fate of the crew, if you believe the story, is more cut and dry, or should I say, frozen and wet. In this unsubstantiated story of oceanic horror, the crew of a ship named Hope came across what appeared to be a ship in pretty good shape. From a distance, there appeared to be crew members working on the deck. This struck the crew of the Hope as a little strange, as the Jenny had been missing for many years. When they got closer, it all started making sense though. The men they had seen atop the ship were indeed still there, but not alive. Each one was frozen solid, met with a frigid end. Yikes. Things got worse when the captain of the Hope decided to check out the inside of the ship, where he found more frozen corpses. The Jenny's captain was discovered frozen to a chair with a journal nearby. The final entry in his log read, "No food for 71 days. I am the only one left alive." That one sentence carries all sorts of latent horror, with images of more than 2 months without food in a horrible frozen environment. One has to wonder if any crewmates became food for the survivors, and what life must have been like as hope faded by the day. Coming in number 2, we've got the Baron Falkenberg. Here's a general rule for life. Don't kill your brother and his bride. If you can't abide by that, maybe you deserve to be carted out to a ghost ship and doomed to roam the waters until time immemorial. The good Baron was unable to follow this seemingly simple rule and ended up in a less than savory position. The story goes like this. One day, after being missing for quite a while, Baron Falkenberg's brother returned home. Folks were quite pleased with his return, and the brother proposed marriage to a lovely young maiden the Baron himself was interested in. At their wedding feast, the Baron lost his temper and cracked his sibling over the head with a bottle, killing him. The bride-to-be was terrified and ran off, but the Baron pursued her to confess his love. This didn't go over very well, and the woman told the Baron that she'd rather be dead than be with him. A very literal man, the Baron interpreted this dramatic retort as a request, and he stabbed her. Realizing the grave mistake he'd made, the Baron fled to the beach, where he found a man with a dinghy waiting. This man told the Baron that the captain was waiting for him and rowed out to a much larger ship off the shore. From there, the Baron boarded the ship, and for the past half a millennium, he's remained on board. This ship always seems to be heading north, flickering with blue flame and filled with skeletal sailors. And finally at number 1, we've got the Palatine. Forget the Block Island sound, we're talking about the Block Island light. If you ever find yourself around Rhode Island between Christmas and New Year's, take a look across the water at night. It's said you might see an old ship blazing against the darkness. There are many stories about where this ship came from, and none have been officially confirmed. Some say that the crew had come down with a terrible illness and the captain would not let them go to shore. Others say that folks from Rhode Island lured the ship to the shoals in order to take what they could from it, killing the remaining passengers. And then there's the alternate version where the locals actually rescued the folks on board and nursed them back to health. So why is the ship on fire in the ghostly apparitions then? Well, apparently a woman was left on the island by the ship and eventually came to be known as a witch. She got her revenge on the vessel by imagining it on fire and cursing it for leaving her alone. This idea became more popular, and now the story involves a flaming ship.
Kicking off at number 5, Charles Vane. Yeah, exactly. Did you get those 10 points? The man in chains that met his demise at Gallows Point in the legendary Jamaican town of Port Royal, way back in 1721. Charles Vane in many ways was perhaps the archetypal pirate. He seized opportunity wherever it presented itself, and more so than many of the more respectful buccaneers, Charles Vane was an incredibly violent and bloodthirsty individual. He was believed to have been born sometime in 1680 in the then Kingdom of England, before finding his way to the Bahamas as a young man, where his piratical career began. By 1717, Charles Vane had become such a successful privateer that his machinations led him to being one of the most prolific leaders in the newly founded Republic of Pirates in Nassau, alongside the likes of Calico Jack Rackham, Stede Bonnet and Sam Bellamy. From here, Charles Vane ravaged his way across the Bahamian waters in his fleet of pirate vessels, the Lark, the Ranger and the Catherine. He became feared by sailors alike for his cutthroat cruelty, often torturing sailors from the ships he captures just for the sake of it. Things didn't end too well for old Charlie though, because by February 1719, Vane and his pirate fleet were caught in a storm off the Baie Islands, and his reckless decision making forced his crew to mutiny, where they marooned him on an uncharted island in classic pirate fashion. Here he was picked up by a passing British ship, recognised as the wanted criminal that he was, and finally met his end after being brought to Port Royal, where he was tried and hanged for piracy in March 1721. Coming in at number 4, Bartholomew Roberts. Barty Roberts, perhaps the most successful pirate in terms of amassed wealth in the whole of the golden age of piracy. Born John Roberts on the 17th of May 1682 near Pembrokeshire in Wales, he would eventually go down in history under the nom de plume Black Bar, although that particular title was never used during his lifetime. It is often debated as to whether Roberts was born a peasant or into a family of wealth, but nevertheless he took to the seven seas at the ripe old age of just 13, where eventually he worked his way up to the rank of second mate on the slave ship Princess for the East India Company. And while this is where things got a little bit interesting for Barty Roberts, as the Princess was besieged by a fleet of pirates led by Captain Howell Davis and later captured. The pirates offered the crew two choices: die or become a pirate. Turns out Captain Davis and Roberts got on like a house on fire. They were both Welsh and conversed often in their native tongue, and although he was reluctant to become a pirate, he soon saw the advantages of the liberty and freedom that came with it. In fact, following Captain Davis's death at the hands of a Portuguese ambush, the crew later elected Roberts as their new captain, despite only being a pirate for a few weeks. Thus began one of the most successful careers in piracy ever seen, as his crew's loyalty and admiration for Roberts began to grow alongside his fearsome reputation and expert seamanship. In total, Bartholomew Roberts captured over 400 ships in his career and amassed nearly 500 vessels in his pirate fleet. His raids led him from Brazil and South America to the west coast of Canada and eventually Africa. Ultimately, Roberts was killed in battle near Cape Lopez, his death shocking the Royal Navy and the pirate world alike. But before his body could be captured, his crew fulfilled his final wish: burial at sea, wrapped in his ship's sail. His remains were never found.
In at number 3 we have two-headed dolphin. It's not unusual for dead marine animals to wash up along the shore, but this particular specimen may be the oddest discovery yet. In 2014, a two-headed dolphin calf washed up on the shore of a Turkish beach. According to Dogan News, the dead dolphin, which was discovered by a gym teacher who was on vacation, washed up onto the beach in Dikili, Turkey, coming from the Aegean Sea. According to the Daily Mail, the calf was believed to be around 1 year old and measured 3.2 feet in length. The calf consisted of 2 heads and 1 tail, and the eyes and blowhole on one head were not fully opened. Two-Girl Metin, the teacher who had found this incredible creature, said, "I couldn't take it in at first. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I've never even heard about a dolphin like this, let alone seen one with my own eyes. I was completely shocked." The remains were taken for a study to the Marine Biology Department of Akdeniz University, where the associate professor Mehmet Gokoglu said it was similar to the occurrence of conjured human twins. The dolphin had a rare condition known as polycephaly. This two-headedness is a severe example of conjoined twins, which results from the incomplete splitting of a fertilized egg. The result is a shared body with separate heads. Polycephaly has been observed in numerous animals such as snakes, sheep, dogs, fish, and people. Coming in at number 2, we have Garfield phones. Beginning in the 1980s, bright orange fragments of Garfield novelty phones were spotted washing up onto a stretch of coastline in Brittany, France. For the past 30 or so years, locals have been finding coiled phone cords, receivers, and feline heads strewn across the shore. Beach cleaners would pick them up. Inevitably, the cat phones kept coming back. The source of the pollution was a disconcerting mystery, and no one knew where the phones were coming from and went unsolved for 30 years. Claire, president of the environmental group Our Built and So, thought activists worried the phones were drifting up from a lost shipping container at the bottom of the ocean, where the plastic Garfield merchandise could be contaminating the marine ecosystem. After years of speculation, the mystery of the wayward Garfield phones were recently solved, but the concerns around the environmental impact remain. The breakthrough in the case came when the publication France Info reported on the Garfields as part of a campaign called Pollution Alert. This caught the attention of a local farmer named Renee Morvan, who met Claire on the beach and told her he knew where to find the cartoon cats. According to Flynn, he said that in the mid-1980s he'd observed the orange phones dotting the beach after a storm. He and his brother decided to investigate, combing the rocky area in the hopes of discovering the source of the strange deposits. Eventually they found it, a metal shipping container stuffed with Garfield phones stuck deep in a sea cave. For most of the year, the cave is rendered inaccessible by the tide, but eventually volunteers were able to make it inside. As they climbed up the entrance of the cave, they stumbled upon bits of Garfield scattered across the rocks. They hoped that once they entered the cave, they would find the shipping container still brimming with phones, potential debris they could prevent from entering the ocean environment. But that was unfortunately not the case. Claire states, "What we found was the remainder of the shipping container, and it was empty. The bulk of the phones were already gone, and the sea had done its job for 30 years, and unfortunately, it's time for the environmental group to pick up the pieces, literally." And finally, in at number 1, we have Snowballs in Siberia. In 2016, residents along the Gulf of Ob, an area in central Siberia above the Arctic Circle, found something strange along the beach, an 11-mile stretch of snowballs. No one in the town of Nida, the closest to the snowball-covered shoreline, remembers the phenomenon occurring before. A local tells the newspaper that, "We have them only in one place. It's as if someone spilled them. They were all different sizes, from tennis balls to volleyballs. We were all very surprised." According to news reports, the snowballs first formed in late October after water in the Gulf of O rose and covered the beach in ice. Just as kids roll snowballs along a snow-covered surface to create bigger spherical creations, ice on the beach rolled along the sand as the tides receded, creating the frozen orbs. This is the first time the icy orbs have been reported in Siberia, but a similar situation had been recorded elsewhere. In 2013, beach ball-sized ice balls washed up along the shore of Lake Michigan, some of them weighing up to 75 pounds. At the time, park ranger Amy Lipscomb explained that those ice orbs form when chunks break off larger ice sheets. Waves round and smooth each layer of ice, like a rock tumbler, as they are added to the balls which are eventually deposited on the beach. Similar ice balls were recorded in Lake Michigan in 2010 and 2015, in the Gulf of Finland in December 2014, and also recovered at Sebago Lake in Maine in winter of 2015. This is truly a natural phenomenon. Hopefully the people of NIDA love a good snowball fight, especially one that comes complete with ready-made ammo. Coming in at number 5, we have the narwhal tusk. If any of you have ever seen the movie Elf, then you're familiar with the cute narwhal in the beginning of the movie, and that movie really brought narwhals to the public's attention and making this sea creature more popular than ever before, but so much about this creature is a mystery. In 1577, the English explorer Martin Frobisher led an expedition of 150 men to the northern Canada in search of gold, but they had come across something they had never intended, and that was the sea unicorn. The myth of the unicorn goes back centuries, and the business of unicorn horn trade was sustained through the Middle Ages and Renaissance by Vikings who killed the so-called sea unicorns, cut off their horns and sold them for an astronomical price. As European naturalists became more familiar with the world's animal, the myth of the unicorn faded, but mystery of the sea unicorn continued. Frobisher's discovery was actually what we know today as the narwhal, but the horn itself continues to be speculated by many. But the horn is apparently not a horn at all, but is a tooth. The relatives of narwhals include species like the beluga whales, orcas and dolphins, but the mystery remains of how did this massive freakish tooth evolve in this one specific species after its ancestors branched off from whales with ordinary teeth. Many scientists and researchers debate about what this tooth is used for, and some suggest it's an acoustic probe, a rudder, an ice picker, or a spear for battling predators. These creatures don't make it easy for researchers to see them use their tusk for anything at all, so it makes many people continue to question it. Many have come up with many different theories about this so-called horn and what they use it for and why they have it. It has created a huge debate between researchers and scientists to this day, but no definite answer has come out to this day. In at number 4, we have the submarine disappearances in 1968. This is one giant mysterious situation, which is the disappearance of 4 submarines from 4 different countries in 1968. The USS Scorpion, a Soviet submarine K-129, a French submarine Minerve, and the INS Dakar went inexplicably missing over just a 5-month period, and the last 2 disappearing only 4 days apart. The exact causes of these sinkings remain unknown and remain a mystery over 50 years later. The INS Dakar was scheduled to arrive in Israel on January 29, 1968. When it didn't return, searchers went out to find it, but after a while there was no sign of the missing submarine. So the search ended on February 4th, and the 69-man crew was officially declared dead in 1981. The cause of the sinking was never determined, and theories say that either a mechanical or human error caused a catastrophic accident, or that the submarine snorkel was damaged after hitting another ship, causing it to flood. The Minerve was on the training operation in the Mediterranean on January 27, 1968, and when they were on their way home, the men were caught in a bad storm. When it was 30 miles away from the port, the Minerve made contact with the men on land and said it would port in about an hour, but an hour came and went, and the submarine had never returned. A frantic search was conducted with 20 vessels and aircrafts trying to locate the Minerve, but it was eventually called off on February 2nd when they found nothing. The K-129 with a crew of 98 descended on March 8, 1968, and almost 2 weeks into patrol on the North Pacific, the K-129 failed to send a scheduled radio message. The Soviets soon began a frantic search, and after 2 months of no sign of the submarine, they gave up their search. The cause of the ship sinking remains unknown and will likely never be known. Almost 3 months after the K-129, the USS Scorpion, a nuclear-powered attack submarine with a crew of 99 men, went missing in the Atlantic while on its way back from a patrol in the Mediterranean. It was sent out on February 15, 1968, and toward the end of its patrol, it radioed that it was expected to return on May 27th. But as you can guess, the USS Scorpion would never return. Like the others, many searched for the lost ship, but on June 5th, the Scorpion and its crew were declared presumed lost. Over the years, there have been multiple searches for these submarines, but only parts have been recovered, and it's considered one of the biggest mysteries that happened in the sea. No one knows why so many went missing in such a short amount of time, how exactly they went missing for so long, and what exactly made these vessels disappear. And this is a mystery we may never get the answer to.
Number 3 on this list is the one-eyed shark. So before we even get into this entry, let's pull up a picture of what I'm talking about so you guys can see. This is the shark that I'm talking about, and it looks pretty fake, right? Well, that's exactly what the internet came out and said, but it turns out that this one-eyed freak of a shark thing might actually be legit. Let's pull up a few of the later shots of this shark and see how you guys feel now. Cracked talks about these other pictures and says, in these later shots, some time has passed and the creature is noticeably a little worse for wear in comparison to the originals. The gentleman in the pictures above is Dr. Philippe Galvin, one of Mexico's most renowned shark researchers. While it was reported by Pisces Fleet that Dr. Galvin had seen, studied, and produced an initial paper on this otherworldly animal and was awaiting review and publication, skeptics still voiced their disdain, complaining now that the shark had to be a creation of special effects artists and that it didn't have gill slits. But the skeptics were soon put to bed because apparently when a pregnant bull shark was recently caught by a commercial fisherman in the Sea of Cortez, the albino cyclops shark was one of the unborn fetuses found inside. Pretty crazy stuff if you ask me, guys. Also kind of creepy that the one-eyed shark is just an unborn fetus. I guess nature really do just be like that sometimes. Number 2 on this list is a skull. Finding body parts in the ocean, or actually anywhere in the world, has got to be pretty jarring. I'd imagine that probably the most jarring of those body parts though would be a human skull. Reeling that up on your fishing line when you're expecting to catch some rainbow trout has got to be quite the shock. Well, this case is actually way worse than that. Imagine going fishing, fishing up a human skull, and then having that human skull literally be the skull of one of your former best friends. Yeah, that's right guys. What I just described there is exactly what went down to Barry Hunter in 2007. He found the skull of Brian Allison, someone who had gone missing several years prior and someone who Barry would often go drinking with. The commercial trawler, the Jan Denise II, was found at the bottom of the ocean several years prior. Brian Allison was on that boat and it was assumed that he perished when the ship went down, but his body, it was never recovered. His family, ever since that ship had gone down, were truly in a horrible place mentally. They inherently understood that Brian had most likely died at the bottom of the ocean, but without ever receiving confirmation, it truly left them in this horrible gray area that they could never escape. This finding from Barry finally gave them the closure that they needed to move on with their lives. Still, it must have been absolutely horrifying for Barry, who actually found the thing and then later realized who it was. And finally, number 1 on this list is the ghost ship. This is definitely not something that you and your buddies would want to find if you're out for a relaxing fishing trip. Rocket Geeks writes, encountering other ships at sea during a fishing trip isn't such a rare occurrence, but what if they're ghost ships with their occupants still on board? In 2016, 2 fishermen noticed a strange vessel drifting about 50 miles away from the Philippines. Disturbed by the ship's appearance, they decided to board it to see if anyone was on it. What they found was the decomposing body of German explorer Fritz Behorhat, who was last seen in 2009, which had been almost perfectly preserved by the salty air and dry winds. What's crazy to me is that this guy's ship was able to just drift through the ocean for so long without being spotted at all. Apparently, after doing an autopsy on Fritz, he had died on his boat of a heart attack years ago. His boat obviously wasn't anchored or anything when he died, so the wind and the water just took it. During that entire time, it never capsized or hit land. It was just floating in the water for years, letting his body mummify completely. I think this story, more than any that we've looked at today, is just a perfect example at how massive the ocean can be. For years, an entire yacht carrying a dead human being was just going around without anyone seeing it. Who knows how far this boat had traveled during that time or what it had seen? It also begs the question, how many more of these boats are out there right now just floating around? The ocean is a scary and massive place, guys. These are just a few of the mysteries we've found in it, but I guarantee there are plenty more.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Mary Celeste. Don't be tricked by the lovely name, this ship is no fair maiden. Maybe it was named for one, but that's got nothing to do with their ghostly tale. This tale is a tragic one indeed, and one that seems ridiculously risky by today's standards. A captain decided he wanted to make the trip from New York to Italy aboard his ship, the Mary Celeste. Had he decided to bring a super experienced crew and a bunch of cargo, that would be one thing, but this nautical journey was no such business trip. Instead, he decided to bring his wife, 2-year-old daughter, and a crew of 7. That's a small group of people for such an extensive journey, especially when bringing one's family along. But everyone boarded the ship regardless and headed out to sea. Their journey should have been about a month, but they never arrived in Italy. Instead, another ship known as the Di Gracia came across the Mary Celeste, floating aimlessly in the sea. Assuming the worst, the crew of this new ship went to see if anyone was still aboard. But they were never able to help anyone as the ship turned out to be empty. But it wasn't totally gutted though. There were still plenty of supplies in the larder, and the ship itself was still in pretty good shape. Sure, there was a bunch of water on the deck, but it wasn't like it was gonna sink anytime soon. Strangers still, the lifeboat was gone with no indication as to why or where it was heading. So there the Mary Celeste was, without a captain, crew, or family, drifting in the Atlantic. It became one of the most famous ghost ships of its era too, as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle drew inspiration from it, and used this inspiration to write his short story, J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. This tale was a launching board for many theories, from pirates to mutiny to cold-blooded murder. The thing is, nobody knows for sure what actually happened. The captain, his crew, and his family were never heard from again. Now, there are some more realistic theories that have come forth about the inexperienced captain not knowing the full extent of damage to his ship and ordering everyone maybe prematurely onto a lifeboat at the first sight of land. Even so, that likely ended in tragedy as well, as the lifeboat never made it to shore, or so we think. And with all those supplies still on board and the ship not going down anytime soon, it feels a bit like an ironic tragedy now, doesn't it? Coming in at number 4, we've got the Kobenhavn. 5 masts, and none of them prevented the ship from going ghost. You'd think it would be easier to spot that way, but hey, unlike our last ghostly tale, this ship was jam-packed with capable sailors. Well, partly anyway. The Kobenhavn was known as a training ship, which would often take a fair number of cadets. They would learn how to best run the ship so that their subsequent journeys might go a little smoother. One would assume that a training ship wouldn't be subject to overly harsh conditions, just like how any training is supposed to lower the risk of failure during a real-life scenario. Unfortunately, this was not the case. 60 sailors marched aboard this well-fitted ship, and once they departed, they were never seen again. The ship had all anyone would need to succeed, including plenty of lifeboats, an auxiliary engine, and a wireless communication system. So, what went wrong? Nobody really knows. It left the Rio de la Plata on December 14th, heading to Australia. On the 21st, the crew was in touch with another ship and all seemed to be well. After that though, they went totally silent. Some think they ran into an iceberg, others claim that it could have been something more sinister. Either way, darkness and fog definitely played into the equation. For years, the Kobenhavn was missing in action with nothing to show for it. However, some sailors did claim to see a phantom ship with 5 masts sailing the seas. Now, the ghost crew hasn't attempted to communicate with anybody yet, nor has anybody been able to get close enough to confirm what they've seen. But you'd better believe those cadets are seasoned sailors by now. Back in 2012, a wreck was discovered that many believe to be the Kobenhavn. However, this still goes unconfirmed. Coming in at number 3, we've got the ghost ship of the Northumberland Strait. Yes, Canadian ghost pirates. That pretty much sums up my career aspirations right there. I don't know if that means I would be pirating software related to ghosts or actually becoming a phantom upon the Northumberland Strait, but I don't really care as long as my title involves the words Canadian, ghost, and pirate. But back to the actual tale at hand. This ghost ship is said to sail when it's on fire within the Northumberland Strait. What is the Northumberland Strait? It is a body of water that separates Prince Edward Island from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick in eastern Canada. Now you all know some Canadian geography. I'm so proud of you. The story dates back over 200 years when people started reporting a beautiful schooner catching fire and being engulfed in flames as people watched from shore. Anyone who has ever attempted a rescue mission finds that the ship completely disappears before they can reach it. Apparently the ship shows up before a northeast wind, forewarning terrible storms. Some say it's just an example of St. Elmo's fire, a rare weather condition involving the ionization of air molecules in order to produce a faint glow, but those who have seen the ship ablaze say that it was much too bright to be explained away like that. The prevailing story is that a pirate made a pact with the devil to protect and hide his treasure, and in return, he and his crew would sail forever on the burning ship. A pact was made as the ship was burning down and would soon sink along with the treasure. In the end, folks claim that their fate was revenge for the terrible deeds they had done in their days of piracy, like their own personal floating hell. Coming in at number 2, we have Baron Falkenberg, a tale of lovers scorned, brothers bashed, and dice rolled. This pirate haunts Germany's North Sea and has been for over 600 years. Baron Falkenberg was a relatively wealthy member of high society, planning to propose to the village's most beautiful maiden. Then his long-lost brother returned with newly found riches and proposed to her first. At the wedding, the Baron became so upset with his brother that he clubbed him over the head with a bottle of champagne. Classy. Naturally, the brother dropped dead. Seeing this, his bride ran away, claiming that she'd rather die than be with the Baron. Ouch. So the Baron did what any rational fratricidal maniac would do, and stabbed her in the heart. How romantic. Then he ran away to the beach, where he was accosted by a shady man on a boat. This mysterious figure invited him to the ship where he came from, which was anchored offshore a little ways out. The Baron accepted and rowed his way to the great grey behemoth. Since entering, nobody has seen him disembark, and he's been at sea for centuries. The ship he boarded always seems to be heading due north, and flickers of blue flame. Some passers-by claim to have seen the Baron himself playing dice with the devil in order to take back control of his soul. Unfortunately, it appears to be very difficult to win a game of chance against the devil. An additional caveat that can be added is that there are those who will claim that the story of the Baron is also connected to a Norse ghost story. The story tells the tale of a Viking sea captain who stole a magic ring from the gods. As punishment for his crimes, he was turned into a living skeleton covered in fire, condemned to spend the rest of eternity affixed to the mast of a ghostly longship. Whether the two stories are about the same ship, it's hard to say. However, I think we can all agree that a flaming skeleton pirate is pretty badass. And finally at number 1, we have the Flying Dutchman. We saved the most well-known for last. The legendary ghost ship is said to glow with ghostly light as it sails the 7 seas. It will attempt to send messages to land or to people long dead if hailed. Unfortunately, nobody really wants to hail this ship, as the sight of it is seen to be a portent of doom. Like most ghostly ships, the Dutchman can never make port and is doomed to sail the oceans forever. It's theorized that the spectral seafarer had been rounding the treacherous Cape of Good Hope when it encountered a sudden storm. The hatches were battened down and the captain swore he would push right through come hell or high water, and it turns out a little bit of both were on the menu. For his recklessness with his ship and crew, the captain was divinely punished. He was condemned to sail the seas for eternity, serving as a warning to other mariners of bad weather and the cost of hubris. Sightings of the Dutchman have been reported since the 18th century, with many notable scallywags and scurvy dogs laying eyes on the ghastly vessel. Even Prince George of Wales described seeing a ship glowing with a strange light. If you see a ship with skeletons dancing in the rigging, steer clear. It might look like fun, but the captain will try to lure other vessels onto the rocks to ensure nobody else can pass the cape. Sheesh. Remind me not to take a long sailing trip.
Coming in at number 5, we have World War bombs. Not only will you find seashells, seaweed and driftwood on the beaches, but you may come across some historical bombs from the First and Second World War. Many of these items found were simply dumped overboard after the wars had ended. Discoveries of these items have been found in at least 16 states from New Jersey to Hawaii. Neil Slowey, an oceanography professor at Texas University who had studied this phenomenon extensively, stated that, I quote, "Surprisingly or not, this stuff continues to turn up. They disposed of millions of tons of this stuff." A Defense Department report to Congress in 2009 said more than half of the sea disposals of munitions was done in the Atlantic Ocean. The Pacific got 35%, and the lesser amounts were dumped off Hawaii, Alaska, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean. Another study was released in 2012 estimating there are millions of pounds of undersea bombs in the Gulf of Mexico. Through a combination of natural phenomena, severely low tides and high atmospheric pressure caused 87 7 World War II bombs to wash ashore along England's Caleuche beach in the early spring of 2011. Then in 2013, a beachgoer discovered a partially buried German mine in the surf about 10 feet from shore in Baie, New Jersey. On the same day that the Assateague Island National Seashore in Maryland did a controlled explosion of a World War II bomb that had washed ashore. Then in July 2015, a photo flash bomb designed to illuminate the night sky over World War II battlefields was discovered on a beach near Tampa, Florida, where authorities blew it up on the sand. In 2018, on the beach in Mantoloking, New Jersey, was where 7 World War I rifle grenades were found when the beach was undergoing a beach replenishment project to undo damage from Superstorm Sandy. Coming in at number 4, we have feet. Not only do sea creature bodies and body parts wash ashore, but even human remains have surfaced. Over the last 15 years, at least 21 feet have washed up on beaches between the United States and Canada in the Pacific Northwest. The appendages are almost always still intact inside of a shoe, with no signs of what happened to the body or where they have come from. Each time this gruesome discovery is made, fear and speculation spread among the public. The first of these incidences happened in August of 2007 on British Columbia's Jedediah Island. A girl on vacation from Washington found a shoe, and when she looked inside, there was a foot. The remains were later identified as a local missing man. These similar discoveries have been made over the last decade and a half along the shores of the Chaleurs Sea on both the British Columbia coast and Washington. In at least 2 instances, leg bones were still attached to the feet. The latest discovery was made in January 2019 on Jetty Island in Everett, Washington. A human foot was found in a boot, and it was later linked to a man who had been missing for 3 years. Dr. Kara Raj, an NHS surgeon, says there's a really simple explanation for why this grisly phenomenon keeps happening, and it has nothing to do with people's feet being chopped off by some deranged psychopath. Raj says that when a body sinks, the scavengers in the sea tend to feed off softer parts of the bodies, and that includes the soft tissue and ligaments around our ankles. He also states that the reason it's happened more since 2007 is because of a change in sneaker design. Over the last few decades, shoes have become more buoyant, said Raj. As a result, we could be seeing more severed feet wash up on our shores. The feet are thought to belong to people who were killed in accidents or took their own lives. Medical examiners have ruled that the feet became separated from the bodies as part of the normal decomposition process. Many of the limbs have been linked back to their humans using DNA analysis.
Next up at number 3, Edward Teach, aka the one and only, the notorious privateer, Blackbeard. Now you might be thinking that number 3 is pretty low for a legendary pirate such as Blackbeard, but the fact of the matter is, Blackbeard was actually a pretty decent guy, and as far as gruesome torture and bloodthirsty violence goes, he was on the tamer side of piracy. Instead, Blackbeard relied on the illusion of fear and the theatrics of the dark arts to strike fear in the hearts of men, and boy, did he find success in that. Contrary to popular belief, Edward Teach spurned the use of any force, and was far removed from the modern day picture of the tyrannical pirate he's so often depicted as. He commanded all of his vessels with the consent of his crews, and there is no known historical account of him ever harming or murdering those that he held captive. Blackbeard was a shrewd and calculating leader, commanding his infamous 40-gun ship, Queen Anne's Revenge. He would often board a ship in an ominous cloud of smoke created by the slow matches that he would light in his beard and hat. It was also heavily rumoured that Blackbeard was involved in voodoo and the dark arts, but it's also highly likely that it was a rumour started by Blackbeard himself. You see, the terrifying legacy of Blackbeard is down to the mystery that he permeated. In all likelihood, we will never know his true name, as Edward Teach is often believed to be a pseudonym alongside the many other names that are associated with him. Nevertheless, that was the point of his notoriety, and seemingly he became one of the most iconic pirates in history while still being a pretty decent dude. Nice one, Blackbeard. Swinging in now at number 2, Qing Shi. And where do we even begin? Because when it comes to pirates, Qing Shi is without a doubt the most successful pirate in history, commanding the largest pirate crew ever assembled, the Red Flag Fleet, 300 ships consisting of anywhere between 20,000 and 40,000 pirates that ravaged and plundered the 7 seas for over a decade. And still, she died in her own bed as a free woman at the age of 70 after retiring and running a successful casino in southern China. Born in 1775, she became a Cantonese prostitute working in a floating brothel in Guangzhou. In 1801, she married the notorious pirate Cheng Yi, and following his death, she utilized her shrewd opportunism to gain control of his fleet. From then on, Qing Shi ruled the oceans with an iron fist, beheading anyone who stepped out of line and ruling over her Red Flag Fleet with a strict pirate's code that often resulted in cruel and violent punishments for any broken rule. The thing is though, despite despite her tyrannical punishments, it worked to a startling efficiency, allowing the widow of Cheng to ultimately rule over tens of thousands of pirates. Her ability to coordinate such a large pirate fleet pitted her against entire navies, and she often skirmished against the British, the Chinese, and the Portuguese, plundering and reaving with ease by sheer numbers alone. In fact, she was such an iconic pirate that after her eventual capture, the Chinese government granted her a pardon, and in her later years she served as a military advisor when battling against the British Army in the First Opium War of 1839. Her success as a pirate is completely unrivaled, and her legacy alone remains an extraordinary feat of history. And finally, coming in at our number one spot, Ned Lowe. Because whilst Ching Shi is without a doubt the most successful pirate in history, our number one spot is reserved for perhaps the most cruel. Edward Lowe, otherwise known as Ned, was actually only active as a pirate for 3 short years, but during that time he committed some of the most violent and heinous acts ever seen throughout the golden age of piracy. Born into poverty in the year 1690 in Westminster, London, Ned became a thief and a pickpocket at an early age. After a taste for crime as a young man, he soon caught a ship bound for the New World, where he briefly settled in Boston, Massachusetts. After his wife died in childbirth, Ned decided to take out his rage as a pirate, and thus began one of the most bloodthirsty reigns in piracy. Ned Lowe preferred to maintain a small fleet of 3 or 4 ships, and during his brief 3-year endeavour, Lowe and his crew captured over 100 ships, burning the vast majority of them after torturing and murdering their crewmen. During one particular pillage, fearing capture, the enemy ship's captain threw his loot overboard, abandoning it at sea. After discovering what he'd done, Lowe sliced off the captain's lips with a dagger, then cooked them in a frying pan and forced the captain to eat them. He made a man eat his own lips. And then he massacred the entire crew and burned the ship to cinders. The thing is, little is written about Ned Lowe because he was such a force of cruelty and hatred. In the words of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Ned Lowe was a savage and desperate man, a man of amazing and grotesque brutality. Unlike the romanticised notions of the likes of Blackbeard and Captain Roberts, Ned Lowe was a true psychopath who saw the opportunity of piracy to satiate not just his criminal endeavours, but the darkness of his own soul. The true meaning of a dread pirate. Skull and crossbones and all.
Number 5 on this list is the Tiger Shark Detective. I've named this the Tiger Shark Detective because the catching of this shark actually played a crucial role in a murder mystery. It all started when 2 fishermen back in 1935 caught a tiger shark off the coast of Australia. They brought the shark back to shore and donated it to an aquarium. This shark was in the local news at this point and had quite the name for itself. A week into it being at this aquarium during a live feeding where there was actual literal onlookers watching, this shark coughed up what looked to be a human arm. The police obviously got involved at this point and had to do some investigating to see how it got there. They determined through a series of tests that the arm had not been bitten off by the shark, but that it had been chopped off by something else and that the shark had swallowed it whole. The story would have been over, but the arm had something on it that distinguished it from other arms. It had a tattoo. This was a rare tattoo, and back then tattoos themselves were pretty rare altogether. Investigators soon realized that it was the same tattoo that a former police informant had on his arm, Jim Smith. He had gone missing a while back and they had no idea what happened to him. They started piecing it all together and looked into what potentially went wrong. They then realized that Jim had tried to blackmail the wrong people and it hadn't gone so great for him. The murderers then killed Jim and disposed of his body, but kept the arm because they knew that the tattoo would be able to lead people to the conclusion that it was Jim. They anchored this arm down and threw it in the water, not suspecting that a tiger shark would eat it and then later be caught by a fisherman. Eventually, the police tracked down the killers and brought them to justice, and it was all because these 2 fishermen fished up a tiger shark that just happened to eat some pretty important evidence. Number 4 on this list is the Chimera lobster. Catching a lobster isn't really that impressive, but what if you caught a lobster that looked as if it came straight from another dimension? A little bit more mysterious if you ask me. Cracked writes, when Alan Robinson headed out to sea in Bar Harbor, Maine in July of 2006, he, like all commercial fishermen, was hoping for a little luck. What he hauled into his boat that day was a 1 in 50 million discovery. It looks like a fish torture delicacy, but it's actually a natural phenomenon phenomenon? Well, if you consider something that happens practically never a natural phenomenon. A chimera occurs when two zygotes with different cells, and sometimes from different species, combine together to form a single creature or person. Yeah, there have been human chimeras who are the genetic equivalent of having non-identical twins in one body. Unfortunately, the human versions are far less dramatic looking than what you might expect based on the lobster. We're talking legendary Pokemon levels of rare here, guys. Like, this lobster is something seriously special. And just look at that thing. It's split directly down the middle. One half looks cooked and ready to serve, and the other half looks like a regular everyday lobster. This is just one way that this phenomenon can appear. There have been reports where lobsters can come out as blue before, or even harlequin. It's a very mysterious event when it happens, and one of the rarest on the entire planet.
Coming in at number 3, we have the Bermuda Triangle. Named for the triangular shape of around 500,000 square miles of ocean between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, for centuries the Bermuda Triangle has been mystified as a harrowing patch of ocean where sailors and pilots are prone to lose contact with the natural world and disappear forever. Back when Christopher Columbus first sailed the area, he claimed to see a giant ball of light in the sky that crashed into the horizon and made it glow. Soon after, all sorts of strange events happened in the area, including several boats mysteriously disappearing, and in one incident in 1945, an entire squadron of US torpedo bombers vanished into thin air due to all these weird instances, giving this place the name the Devil's Triangle. The exact number of ships and airplanes that have disappeared is not known, but it's estimated that around 50 ships and 20 planes have been victim to the Bermuda Triangle, and many of these mysterious disappearances of these ships and planes have never been recovered. Many see the Bermuda Triangle as a real phenomenon and have multiple theories to try and explain this mysterious place, and some of these theories are human error, paranormal explanations, violent weather like hurricanes, the Gulf Stream, which is a major surface current within the ocean, methane hydrates, which is a form of natural gas that causes bubbles to form around the ship and ultimately sink it without warning. All of these are only theories, and the Bermuda Triangle to this day is the most notorious sea legend of all time. In at number 2, we have the Gulf of Mexico's cursed shipwreck. An estimated 4,000 shipwrecks litter the seabed across the stretch of water, and the Gulf of Mexico is one of the wealthiest locations for maritime archaeology in the world. In February 2001, oil workers for ExxonMobil were laying some pipeline when they happened to stumble upon a shipwreck about 2,600 feet deep. After discovering the wreckage, a team was assembled to explore this mysterious ship, but nothing seemed to go right. The exploration submarine malfunctioned right as it was getting ready to go down to check out the wreck, and that was only the beginning of these mysterious malfunctions. Others include video monitors going out whenever they fired their thrusters, sonars breaking, and hydraulics going haywire with no explanation for any of these problems. After nothing working and things continuing to break, the Navy sent a researcher submarine down to investigate the wreckage, and on the way down it suddenly self-destructed, and somehow when it finally did get to the wreck, its arms were too short to reach anything. 6 months later, in July in 2002, a team working aboard the NR-1 decided to launch a robotic sub down to the wreck site, but the malfunctions continued. The second the rover entered the water, it veered to the right and went out of control. The tether had caught in the propellers, which caused the vessel to smash into the underside of the ship, and the rover was never recovered. Later in the summer of 2002, the curse would continue as a ship from Sustainable Sea Program of the NOAA offered to pick up artifacts from the site. The first time the vessel attempted to leave the dock, debris was lodged in the propeller. The second time, the propeller locked and the ship ended up in dry lock, needing repairs. Over the years, many others have tried to learn more about this wreck, but little was found, and what was found wasn't at all helpful. To this day, nothing has been able to get too close to the shipwreck to investigate and explore the phenomenon, and very little is known about this mysterious ship. Many believe the lives lost in the wreck continue to haunt the ship and will keep anyone and everything out of it at all costs. And finally, in at number 1, we have the unmapped ocean floor. This is truly one of the biggest mysteries, and humans' curiosity about the Earth's floor is centuries old. Much remains to be learned about the ocean, especially exploring the mystery of the deep sea. From mapping and describing the physical, biological, geological, chemical, and archaeological aspects of the ocean and understanding their dynamics. For centuries, scholars believed the deep sea to be a lifeless place. Until the late 19th century, we've discovered there is a diversity of life and creatures living down there. Many researchers and divers had tried to dive and take submarines down to explore more of this unknown place, but it's very hard due to the extremely cold temperatures, the darkness, and the literally bone-shattering pressure that's more than 1,000 times that at sea level. In 2019, a retired naval officer, Victor Victor Vescovo set a new record as one of the deepest dives to date, reaching almost 36,000 feet down in a submarine into the deepest place on Earth, the Marianas Trench. The ocean covers more than 70% of the planet's surface, driving weather, regulating temperature, and ultimately supporting all life's organisms. Throughout history, the ocean has been a vital source of sustenance, transport, commerce, growth, and inspiration. But to this day, more than 80% of the ocean remains unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored, and it's still unknown how deep the ocean really is. Given the high degree of difficulty and cost in exploring our ocean using underwater vehicles, researchers have relied heavily on technologies such as sonar to generate maps of the seafloor, but currently less than 10% of the global ocean is mapped using modern sonar technology, and only about 35% of the United States have been mapped using modern methods. As we go deeper into the ocean floor, it's too deep for this modern technology because it's too remote and dark for this type of visual mapping. So if you go swimming in the ocean, it's very unknown of what is swimming and living below you. But scientists and researchers continue to develop technologies to unlock the many secrets of the ocean. The NOAA is working to increase our understanding of the ocean realm.
Starting us off at number 5, we have Yellow Jack. We're gonna set sail on a weird one to start us off. If you're a flag enthusiast, you might see the ending of this one coming from a mile away, but we'll get there in a minute. So the legend of Yellow Jack starts upon a spice and gold-filled ship preparing to leave the Indies and head back home. The crew was accounted for, the cargo was secure, the captain was feeling nice. Then, at the last second, a mysterious figure asked if they had room for one more. Feeling pretty good about their haul, they welcomed this extra pair of helping hands on board. Wrong move. Turns out this was a disreputable lad known as Yellow Jack, with a reputation so abhorrent that the ship was forbidden to enter any port she called upon. For ages, the crew sailed from port to port, hoping that someone would let them dock, but it never happened. They were forced to endlessly cruise the seas, running lower and lower on supplies. Patience, too. Eventually, the crew went mad and committed mutiny before they all murdered each other. Some say the ship is still sailing, the ghosts of these sea-locked sailors manning the helm. Someday they may find a port that will take them and they will finally be able to rest. In the meantime, they will sail the seas, infecting other ships with the same madness that Yellow Jack caused. Now this is a spooky, ghostly story in its own right, but it could also be a reference to a different ship killer at the time. Disease. The Yellow Jack is a flag flown by ships infected with plague, cholera, and other nasty, fast-spreading diseases. So Yellow Jack itself could be a metaphor for disease, and ports weren't letting them in because of quarantine procedures. Absolutely fascinating, and it would also make a killer movie. A pirate quarantine body horror. Think The Thing meets Wreck meets Pirates of the Caribbean. Oh damn. Coming in at number 4, we have the Caleuche, a Chilean ship sailing around an island known for its terrible storms. Shining white sides, 3 masts with 5 sails, blood red. The ship sails independent of any human input. Sure, there's a ghost crew, but the Caleuche is known for being sentient. The ship has a mind of its own. It'll glide along the water at incredible speeds and is able to submerge and continue navigating underwater, similar to the famous Flying Dutchman. When it passes, folks say you can hear the crew cackling for a brief moment. It's a ship known for the merriment of its ghostly crew. They throw parties often and hop around on one leg. The folks on board often only have one leg because the other is folded behind their back, similar to another Chilean mythological entity. To top off their strange looks and mannerisms, some crew members have backwards faces, terrifying all who lay eyes upon them. Some say the Caleuche is manned by sailors, both dead and alive, dragged from the depths and snagged off passing ships. Another legend says that the ship is piloted by the souls of the drowned, brought aboard by water spirits and granted the gift of life in exchange for their servitude. Not so sure that's a good deal, you know, life eternal, but you'll always be on a stinky ship? Maybe the parties are just that sick. Merchants who trade with Caleuche supposedly become very wealthy afterwards, and anyone who has laid eyes upon it wears a crooked smile forever. Again, interesting deal. Lots of money, crooked smile. I guess you could afford a dentist and some plastic surgery at that point.
Next up at number 3, the Fireship of Baie de Chaleurs. Which, I mean, Come on guys, that's probably the most awesome sounding title to anything on this historical list, right? The Fireship of Baie de Chaleurs sounds like something that Geralt of Rivia himself would sail down to Skellig after a summer in Toussaint, but whatever, that's by the by, because this vessel in question actually takes us over to the eternally autumnal eastern tones of New Brunswick, Canada. Now the Fireship of Baie de Chaleurs is also more commonly referred to as the Chaleurs Phantom or the Phantom Ship, and it often takes the form of a series of ghost lights just before a storm, appearing as a large three-mast galley. Now the actual mechanics of this phenomenon are dubiously debated, and many believe it's caused to be down to either the weather phenomenon of St. Elmo's fire or an undersea release of natural gas after a patch of rotting vegetation just off the New Brunswick coast. I mean, that's a completely different story entirely, but what we're concerned with is the actual origin of the Fireship, the history of which is equal parts tragic and gruesome. As the legend goes, back in 1501, a Portuguese captain had spent a year pillaging the coast of Baie de Chaleurs, capturing Mi'kmaq natives for the slave trade. However, his cutthroat agenda was miscalculated, as a year later, when he returned to the region on his second voyage, he was captured, tortured and killed by the Mi'kmaq people in revenge for their kidnapped tribesmen. The legend didn't end there though, because a year later, the brother of the Portuguese captain sailed to the bay in search of his missing sibling, and upon seeing the same flags, the Mi'kmaq people attacked the ship, setting it ablaze whilst it was moored in the bay. Cut off, burning, and with certain death facing them, the sailors swore to haunt the bay for 1,000 years as their blazing fireship sank into the Bay of Chaleurs. Now, whilst later both Mi'kmaq and Portuguese casualties washed up on the shores of the island, the bay itself is said to be haunted by those that perished, often appearing as distraught sailors and warriors, their flesh burnt by the fireship. Swinging in at number 2, the Princess Augusta. And on the topic of ghostly phenomenon, this particular apparition is perhaps one of the most well documented ghost ships of the 18th century, although the actual history behind it is shrouded in intrigue. Although the folklore account of this particular vessel is based upon the historical wreck of the Princess Augusta, a ship that sailed out of Rotterdam in August 1738 under the command of Captain George Long, in more modern records it is commonly referred to as the Palatine, where the Palatine Light, the apparition in question, famously gets its name. And the reason for that is down to the nature of the ship. Alongside 14 of his crew, Captain Long's directive was to transport 240 German immigrants from the Palatinate region of the Rhineland to build a new life for themselves in Philadelphia. However, we know that this is the tale of a ghost ship, and from the offset, their vessel was afflicted with some terribly tragic luck. Not long after passing through the Atlantic, the Princess Augusta's water supply was contaminated, causing a fever and flux to spread through the ship, killing 200 of its passengers, half the crew, and the captain himself. The ship's first mate, Andrew Brooke, quickly took command as the survivors leapt out of the frying pan and into the fire, getting hit by severe storms that pushed the ship far off course to the north. They then endured 3 months of extreme weather and dwindling supplies, when eventually they emerged shipwrecked in Block Island, not far from Rhode Island. Here the tale splits, but one thing is certain: Andrew Brooke, the first mate and commanding captain, took what remained of his crew and rowed ashore without once looking back at the cursed ship. It is said that some of the passengers survived, aided by the Block Islanders, but little to nothing is known about those that survived the entire voyage. As the legend goes, the Princess Augusta was set alight from the coast in the dead of night, pushed out to sea to burn and then disappear. At night, they say that if you listen closely, you can hear the screams of those that didn't make it back to shore. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, the Duke of Danzig. And for our most terrifying ghost ship on this list, of course it has to be a brutal and bloodthirsty pirate ship, a privateer that plundered her way across the Caribbean, notoriously in the name of her royal namesake, the Duke of Danzig. This ship's seafaring career was relatively quiet for the first few years of service, mainly acting as more of a letter of marque, a deterrent more so than a private man of war. However, her fate quickly changed after changing command and sailing under the French captain Francois Aregnadoux. Now, his intentions were to sail and plunder his way across the 7 seas, and plunder he did from Liverpool to Barbados, capturing and scuttling more ships than he could count on his way. However, despite being a vessel of the French Empire, strangely enough, sometime after late June 1812, the Duke of Danzig just disappeared, although there are several records catching a glimpse of her around Canada, but she was never seen again. After the last mention of her, it was thought that she'd been destroyed by a tropical cyclone or sunk in the night after an encounter with a British frigate. However, As the legend goes, that was not the last of the Duke of Danzig. After the golden age of piracy had been sated, a captain by the name of Napoleon Gallois relayed his records of a French frigate encountering the wreck of the Duke of Danzig drifting listlessly at sea. As his crew witnessed, the ship itself was covered from helm to hull in dried blood, and in staggered rows were the putrefying corpses of her crew, many of which were brutally crucified to the masts or the deck. Strangely enough, there were no signs that she had been in recent battle. In fact, despite the blood, she was pristine, no shot holes, and her sails and rigging intact. After searching the ship, Gallois' crew found a stack of blood-stained papers identifying the captain as the same Francois Aregnadour. And then, as they left, the crew of the frigate set the brig ablaze, forever to be buried at sea, along with her mystery.